Welcome back to Missing People in America. Today we are here with the family of Casi Pogue, who went missing in Greenville, South Carolina on July 5th, 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about Casi?
So Casey is my mom, and at the time of her disappearance, she was 40 years old. She was born and raised in kind of the sticks of Oklahoma. Um, just kind of a larger than life personality. I don't think there's a single person who ever met her who would describe her as timid or quiet. She really was the center of attention wherever she went. One of my favorite stories to tell about her is one time we were driving to go see, this might be dating myself a little bit, but we were going to go see Twilight in theaters. And she had pulled onto a main road and just completely passed this barricade that was in the road, thinking it was a mistake, and ended up driving in the middle of a parade and had just like a bunch of mints from Sonic in her glove box. She's like, I don't know, just chuck those out the window, I guess. So she was always just finding something ridiculous or something silly to do. I mean, she was a hoot and a half, is what we like to say.
I would say that is a
That's
good
amazing.
story.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And can you tell us about her disappearance?
Yeah. So the day before she went missing, July 4th, she had gone across the street to her neighbor's house. She was wearing just a bra and her leggings, and she was clearly disoriented. You know, she was telling them, you know, my dog got hit by a car, and the dog was with her. And the neighbor said, I don't think so. Like, I just watched you cross the street. She was just fine. And they had called the police and said, you know, I think something's wrong. She's not really acting right. And they took her to a different hospital than the one she went to on the 5th. She was discharged after a couple of hours. They sent her home, and she was picked up by her landlord at the time. Her house sat on the same property as her landlord, just closer to the street. So they brought her home, and the next day, this is all on video, by the way, her neighbor noticed her in the window of her house acting kind of suspicious. So she started to record her, and she saw my mom open up her bedroom window and climb out of it and fall into like the rock bed below and take a second to get her bearings and then take off running into the woods next to her house. Again, she called the police. I think it was Greenville County that responded, and they decided they probably should take her in an ambulance to get checked out. So she was taken to Greenville Memorial Hospital on July 5th, sometime in the afternoon. I believe it was like 3 or 4 p.m. And her landlord's son, who was her best friend, left his number as an emergency contact, as well as his mother's number. And around 8:30 p.m., she is discharged, and she's seen on surveillance footage leaving the hospital. She stops to talk to someone in a van for a second. She gets in the van for a couple of minutes and then exits and leaves, walks to a nearby park, sits down on a bench to kind of collect herself, gets back up, walks out of frame, and that is the last we've seen of her.
Now, my internet broke up. I want to make sure I heard this right.
Yeah.
She got into a van with someone and then got out.
Yes.
Do you know who was in that van?
We have asked the police if they thought that was something worth following up with. You know, maybe if she had said something to whoever was in the van about where she was going, who she thought they were, and they never followed it up. They didn't think it was crucial to her disappearance at all. So we do not know who it is. We've put out stuff on social media that, you know, if you were driving a dark van on July 5th at Greenville Memorial, so please reach out. And we just never had anyone reach out to us. So.
No, she was in the hospital twice, or at least twice. Was it twice or?
Yes, July 4th and July 5th.
Okay. Was she ever diagnosed with anything while she was in the hospital?
During that time, no, she did have a couple of different health problems. And actually, at the time of her disappearance, she had, I believe, one or two broken ribs from just various different things. I guess she wasn't taking care of herself very well. She was extremely underweight as well. So that probably played into it. That's another reason we've always kind of wondered why she would climb out a window and take off running with a broken rib unless she was scared. We just have a lot of unanswered things. But at that time, I think they had just said it was a manic episode, probably induced by some drug use.
Was she taking any medications for any of her diagnoses prior?
She was for a while. She had some blood pressure issues, and she was bipolar, but she did stop taking medication a couple years prior to her disappearance, just, costs and stuff like that.
No. Have you ever seen her act erratic like she did prior to her disappearance?
Yes, maybe not as severely as it played out before her disappearance, but there were several times where she would act erratic. It was a different type of erratic. She was never one to kind of put herself in a position where she would get hurt. She had broken her back before in a car accident and was very aware of her body. So I'd never seen her push herself past her physical limits, but she would come up with these kind of grand delusions and stuff that, just weren't true. There was one time where a couple years prior to her going missing, she had been taken to the hospital by my aunt. And while they were waiting in the waiting room, she got up and started pacing and was really frantic and had said to my aunt, like, I just want to go back and see Debbie Ann. They have her back there for surgery. And my aunt had to tell her, no, we're here for you. Debbie Ann's not even here right now. So she would come up with these, I'd almost say hallucinations that were not true, and would act very erratically, but not to this degree, I'd say.
Now, has she ever jumped out a window or done something similar like that prior?
No, my mom was very much someone of comfort. She was not, we've always said, she's not like a Bear Grylls who's going to take off into the woods. She's kind of bougie. She's not someone who does stuff like that ever. And so that was pretty shocking when we had heard that something had frightened her enough to climb out her window, because she was not that person at all.
Was this window on the first floor, second floor, or?
The first floor.
Okay.
Was anybody else living in the home with her at that time?
My brother was living with her up until about 2 months before she disappeared. And from his account, he said that her best friend, her landlord's son, I believe I'm allowed to use his name because of the Freedom of Information Act, Nathan, he was staying at the house with her pretty frequently, more often than not. And we have had a couple people, neighbors and stuff, say that they believe they saw Nathan go into her house before she left through the window. So from our perspective, as far as we know, he was in the house when she left, and he has said online that he was the one who put her in the ambulance and was the last person to see her.
Do you know how their relationship was?
Yes, they met in, I believe, 2012 through an outpatient rehab program. My mom was there for alcoholism, mostly a couple of substance abuse issues, but it was predominantly her alcoholism. Nathan was just kind of an addict in whatever shape or form he could get it. And they always tell you don't make friends in those programs because they're not reliable, but they had just felt some kind of connection to each other, and they really hit it off. They became good friends. Their relationship was pretty tedious at times, as you would expect from two people that met in a rehab program. And it was pretty off and on, but when it was on, she seemed to not do as well, and when it was off, she was snoring. So it was pretty rough, and towards the end, things got pretty messy between them. So
After that rehab stint, do you know of any relapses with either of them?
yes, Nathan was, by my account, I've seen him never fully sober. He never really wanted to make that commitment. He was in a program with another family member of mine who remembers meeting him, remembers hearing him talk in these meetings, and had always said, I just got the impression that he was just saying what he needed to say to get out of the program and stuff like that. My mom had long stints of sobriety. At one point, she was sober for almost 10 years. But once she met Nathan, she fell off, and then she would get good for a couple years and then fall off again. And it was just kind of a back and forth. And once they were more cemented in their friendship, those last couple of years, she really just never got back on.
Has she ever said that she was afraid of him or anyone else?
She did have some arguments with him that my brother has recounted back to us. At one point, Christian, my younger brother, said that he was in the house and he, by his own belief, he doesn't think Nathan knew he was there. He heard some shouting, which quickly turned to my mom screaming, and he said he had run out to see if everything was okay. And he said he saw my mom kind of cowering back, and then Nathan looked at him shocked to see he was there, and he said Nathan quickly became kind of frantic and wanted to leave very quickly, and my mom would never say what happened. There was an incident in 2019 where I was still living with my mom at that time, and I had left for a little bit to go run some errands or something. And when I came back, Nathan was there with a boyfriend of his. I do believe that the boyfriend has since passed on. I'm not sure exactly. But his boyfriend was like an in-home health specialist for like older people, and had confided in both of them that he was kind of skimming pills from his patients to kind of fuel their habit. I had come back and they were all pretty strung out, and my mom had burns across both of her hands, like from her thumbs down to her palms. And I had asked, what happened? And Nathan had said, oh, she texts a lot. She's always on her phone. And while that might be true, I was 19 at the time and also always on my phone, and I never had anything like that. And so I had said, like, it looks like she might have burned herself on like a pipe or something, or lighting up something. I would rather you just tell me, because it looks like she needs to go to the hospital. And as soon as I said hospital, it was like a switch flipped. He started to panic. They're all under the influence at this point. He took a chair outside. He pinned my mom to it, and he had his boyfriend take a kitchen knife and slice into her hand to like cut the burns out. And my mom's crying. She's panicking, and he's holding her down. And I had said, I'm going to go grab my keys. I'm taking her to the hospital because something's wrong. And in the time it took me to grab my keys, get my bag, get my stuff together, he had already slipped her something, and she was passed out, and she had urinated on herself already. So after that, she had said, without saying as much, that she did sometimes wonder if Nathan really had her best interest at heart. And I think she always knew that maybe he wasn't a good friend, but it's hard to see that when that's the person kind of supplying your lifestyle, and that's also the person who knows you at your darkest. So I've never seen Nathan outside of that get physical with her. Christian never saw with his own eyes him get physical with her, but we do know that he has a habit of placing his own best interest in front of hers. When she went missing, he told the investigator that she had her phone and that we'd be able to ping it, that we'd be able to just wait for her to text us. And when the investigator had said, oh, that's great, because I can just track the location of the phone and, see where it's being used, see if we can't find her. Nathan then came back and said that he had lied, that he had her phone the whole time, and admitted to going through it and deleting some stuff from the phone that he thought made him look guilty.
So he was interviewed by the police, and that was his story.
He was never formally interviewed. That was just something when they had asked him briefly, like, do you know if she has her phone? And they brought up pinging it. Later, he called and turned it over, but said he wouldn't talk to them.
Okay, so he was never formally questioned by the police.
No, in the case file, he's the only person listed as a suspect, not a person of interest, as an actual suspect. But he was never formally interviewed because he told them he didn't want to, because it made him anxious to do so. And they took that and said, sure, okay. So He's never been interviewed.
And he was the last one to see her?
Yes, by his own admittance on Facebook, he said, I was the last person to put her in the ambulance. I was the last person to see her. And that's it.
How was his relationship with his parents who were on the same property?
Mm-hmm.
How was his relationship with them?
I don't know them personally. I do know, though, from hearing stories of, my brother meeting them and stuff like that, and other family members, that they're almost enablers in a way. They're very well off people. It's a hard-earned fortune that they have. They're both pastors. They run their own church. And there really isn't anything that Nathan could do that they wouldn't try to fix for him, or that they wouldn't, help him succeed in. There really has never been a line in the sand drawn with Nathan. He's an only child, and sometimes that plays into it. And that started to kind of bleed over into his relationship with my mom. My mom was allowed to live there bill free, which I don't know anyone else that would be nice enough to do that for someone that's just their kid's friend. But she was allowed to live there rent free and everything like that. And about a week and a half after my mom went missing, they called some members of my family and said, you have to come get all of her stuff out of the house. And at that point, we were kind of shocked, because we're still thinking of that as, maybe not a crime scene, but that's her home. And that's, that might have something that we could view and see what was going on and maybe what happened. But they were adamant that we came and cleaned out the house. And a neighbor let us know that before we had ever even been granted access to their house, or to the house, that they had gone ahead and ordered a utility dumpster and had already cleaned out a bunch of stuff that we were never made aware of. We were able to kind of piece together a couple things that were missing just from things that we knew to be in the house, but there's no record of what was thrown out. They said that it was just trash, but my mom was not a dirty person at all. She was very kind of anal about it. We always described her as Monica from Friends. She loved a clean house. That's how she wanted it. And whenever we've asked them about that, they've been very passive. They don't want to answer questions about it. And they were really the ones who kind of said the police weren't allowed to talk to Nathan, because they didn't trust that he wouldn't be anxious about it. So they told the Greenville Police Department that they were not allowed to interview Nathan. So very protective, I would say. That's kind of a long-winded way to say that they're pretty protective over him.
Right.
So the home was never officially searched?
It was not officially searched. It was kind of looked around and stuff like that. But there's really no point in searching it now, because a month after my mom went missing, they began a complete and total renovation of the house, to the point that my aunt drove by it one time and drove right past it because she didn't recognize it. It's a completely different house now. And that was only a month after she went missing. So there's no way for us to really know what was in that house, what could have been helpful, what wasn't. There's just no way of us knowing.
Now, do you know if there was any official searches anywhere else?
We were told that cadaver dogs were run across a portion of the property. However, another, like, kind of a third-party missing persons group that's worked with us a little bit has let us know that in their viewing of the case file, there's no record of that anywhere. So we're just kind of operating off of word of mouth. That's what we were told. We have asked that the park where she went missing from, or the health park close to the hospital where you last see her, we've asked for that to be searched, because there's some pretty heavy woods and a couple bodies of water around there. And we have not heard anything back about that. And I don't believe there's any intention to look through there.
Was there anything ever found on her phone once it was turned over?
The only thing that we can see in the case file is that the lead investigator at the time, Russell Irvin, he has since retired and handed it over to Evan Markey. Detective Irvin does say that it's obvious the phone has been tampered with in some way. Nathan even said he went through and deleted a couple things. He said he deleted photos of himself smoking marijuana on the phone. But as far as I know, I don't know if there's more taken off of it or not. There were just a couple things that were a little odd about that. You know, the day before, my mom was clearly not in her right mind. She had made a Facebook post about getting re-engaged to my stepdad. And I was sitting next to my stepdad on the couch up here in Michigan when we saw that post. And I knew he didn't propose to her because he was with me the whole time. So there's just a couple of oddities that you could tell were a little strange, but after July 4th, there's no real activity on her phone except for a couple of incoming calls that are mostly from family members.
Do you know if they ever pulled the phone records for her phone?
They pulled partial records, what they could get. There was a lot of trouble pulling certain things. We've asked if they would pull other phone records as well. You know, we had seen some activity on one of her social media accounts after she had gone missing. And when we asked to pull that, there were some issues with misspellings and affidavits and stuff that we had to keep refiling, and then things weren't getting refiled. So it's kind of a jumbled mess of little bits and pieces. And what we do have doesn't really tell us anything.
Do you know if there was any calls or texts from the phone records that did not match the phone calls or text logs?
No, not from what we see.
And the social media activity after she disappeared was never officially investigated because of all of that trouble, correct?
It was on Pinterest. Something had popped up, like she had updated or pinned something on one of her boards. And I guess Russell Irvin had misspelled Pinterest in his affidavit, and they sent it back and said they couldn't honor it because it was misspelled. And to my knowledge, it was never refiled. Further into the case report, it does say that he lost my mom's medical records as well and had to refile for those. But as far as we can see, they were never received or never filed for. And so, like I said, it's just kind of a bunch of hoops to jump through.
Wow.
Do you know what day the activity on her Pinterest was?
Not off the top of my head, no. I can send you guys the FOIA of what we have from her case file if that would help to kind of see things. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
absolutely.
Did
she have a vehicle?
Not at the time, no. She was mostly relying on other people for transportation.
And was she get into a vehicle with somebody that she didn't know, or is that totally against something that she would do?
A couple years prior to her disappearance, when she was kind of on a bender with Nathan, she did break into one of her neighbor's trucks at one point. There was no one in it, but she did break into it and sit in it for a little bit. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. I do think it's a little strange that she would just pick a car at random and get into it after talking to the person. I don't know, if I see a strange woman come up to me at my car and then circle around, I would lock the doors and say, don't get in here. But she did sit for a couple minutes before getting out. So I don't know if it was just someone trying to be friendly, trying to talk her down a little bit. Maybe they understood that she wasn't in her right mind. I don't know.
No, her personal belongings, ID, wallet, purse, all of that, were they ever found?
No, as far as we know, she would have had her purse on her at the time. That purse has never been found. Neither were her IDs, her cards. The only activity on any of her credit cards are just some deposits and withdrawals from like subscription services and stuff like that. And that's really it.
Was Nathan ever involved with you or the family in trying to locate her?
At first, it's a little choppy. So she left the hospital at about 8:30, and almost instantaneously, within the span of 20 or 30 minutes, he has called to tell, or he has told other people that she is missing. I am up here in Michigan, and by 10 p.m., I had been notified that she was missing. So by his account, either he or his mother called the hospital pretty much as soon as she was walking out the doors to ask how she was, and they let them know that, she's no longer here. She's already been discharged. Mind you, they were the emergency contacts, and they were, according to them, never notified that she was being discharged at all. She was still clearly in a poor state of mind. And from there, my aunt calls one of them to just check and see, what's going on around, I believe, 9 p.m., so about 30 minutes after she left the hospital. And, she just called to see how she was doing, if they had heard from her, because she knew they went to the hospital. And they told her, Casey's missing and we don't know where she is. So she calls Casey's mother, my grandmother. My grandmother tells Casey's father, my grandfather, and he calls me in Michigan to ask, if I had heard from her at all. And that all happens in the span of an hour and a half. So I'm just saying, I don't know anyone that's declared missing in an hour and a half, but we were told she is missing. We later found out that she had been seen at 8:30. So we had just kind of worked under the assumption that, maybe it had happened hours prior or whatever, but that was not true.
Now, excuse me. Now, has there been any tips or sightings of her since?
There have been a couple sightings that have been proven to be false. It's kind of a catch-22 where, you have a community of people that want to rally around someone, and they want to believe that they're helping and that they're seeing someone and they're trying to bring closure to a family and give them relief. But at the same time, sometimes you want to see things. And, we had someone report one of their neighbors as being Casey, and it was someone who had just lived in this community for a couple of years and said, that's not me at all. One odd one that we had come up was a woman who said she caught my mom in a shed on her property. That was kind of up in the air of whether or not it was a confirmed sighting or not. It's my own personal belief that it probably wasn't, just because she had already seen the missing persons poster at that point. And, there were no cameras to confirm whether or not that was her. And so we've had a couple, but they've been mostly disproven.
Where was the one with the shed?
That was in, I believe, Five Forks, South Carolina, which is not very far from where my mom was living at the time. And my mom had previously lived in Five Forks herself.
What, do you know when that sighting was?
I don't want to tell you the wrong answer. I know it was only a couple days after she went missing.
Now, does she have any ties to any other state or city?
Yeah, she was a military wife for a couple years, so she's got ties pretty much all over. She had been living in South Carolina since 2018 at that point. She had remarried, and that marriage lasted all of about 3 months before they were separated. Her history with this particular individual is pretty rough. He had stalked her for about a decade and a half and had sent her threatening letters and stuff like that, had sent her letters when we were over in Germany and she was already married to someone else and said, you married the wrong guy, you're going to live to regret it. Would poke at, my mom had an eating disorder, and would tell her, you could always be skinnier, you should starve yourself to death, just these really like brutal, violent things. And I think my mom was someone who wanted to feel wanted and was willing to look past a bunch of red flags, glaring red flags, obviously. So when he came back into her life a couple years later, in 2018, and had kind of swept her off her feet, promised to take care of her, she was willing to kind of put aside what she knew to be true and that he was the one who was harassing her. They married pretty quickly. I'd say maybe 2 months after reconnecting. And like I said, that marriage didn't last for, I think, more than 3 months. And he packed up and left and took off, and we didn't really hear from him. He did come forward after she went missing and said that she had sent him an email from the hospital in which she says, "I'm in the hospital" at some point. And he said, she just really read me the riot act. He unfortunately deleted the email before we could figure out whether it was the July 4th hospital trip or the July 5th one. We're just trying to see if maybe she had her phone on the 5th to confirm that maybe she ran into someone who then took her phone. But we are trying to push the investigator to maybe subpoena his Gmail account so we can retrieve that email and see what the date was on it.
When was well, other than that email, when was the last time those two had spoken with each other?
As far as I know, it would have been March of 2019 is when they separated. He had agreed to pay, I think, 6 months of rent and utilities on a new place for her since they were separating. And he came and picked up some of his stuff when she was kind of stringing out with Nathan again. And that, as far as we know, is the last time they had contact with each other.
And where is he located now? Sorry.
I believe, so that's another funny thing. Whenever we've tried to check in onto that, it's, we've heard people say he's still in South Carolina. We've heard people say he's in Kansas City. We've heard, he went back to Amelia Island, Florida, which is where his business is located in. He's kind of a hard guy to pin down, so we're not exactly sure where he is. Last we heard, it was Amelia Island, Florida.
Was he ever formally questioned in her disappearance?
No, there actually has never been anyone formally questioned in her disappearance at all. We've all volunteered to talk and tell them what we know and stuff, but no one's ever been sat down for a formal interview.
During her hospital stays, I know that you had mentioned that the medical records were lost and never gotten again, but during the time that they were in possession, was there ever any blood tests or anything like that done?
I know of one blood test that was run in 2019. That was a blood drug screening. Outside of that, I couldn't tell you if there were any run during her last 2 stints in the hospital. I'm not too sure.
Okay. Did Nathan say anything about, since he was there when she went out the window, did he say anything about why she went out the window to either you or maybe medical personnel or anything like that?
No, he's been pretty tight-lipped on the whole thing. The only way we know that he was there is a neighbor saying they believe they saw him. In the video she took, you can see someone behind her in the window that has a similar build to him. And on Facebook, he had said, "I'm looking for my friend. I was the one that put her in the ambulance," and that was it. He hasn't really said anything to any of us except July 7th of 2020, 2 days after her disappearance. He had sent a Facebook Messenger message to my stepdad, who my mom has not been married to since 2014. They were acquaintances after the divorce. They weren't super close or anything like that. But for whatever reason, he sent a message to Greg and said, "I don't know if you know this, but Casey's missing. I found out from her family that she was missing. I have no idea where she is. And, they came and banged on my door and they're asking all these questions and I'm just very confused, And it almost does kind of read like he was trying to get ahead of the situation. I don't think he maybe knew that we were all talking at that point. We've never really figured out why he sent that message, especially to Greg, who he hasn't spoken to since, again, 2014. They've never had any contact outside of that. That's the most he has said to any of us.
And he's the one that called family that night to let them know she was missing, correct?
according to him, what he told the investigator in their brief conversation was, I called the hospital. They told me that she was, she had been discharged. And then Casey's family called me and I let them know. So he never made any calls. We had to call him to ask how she was doing. And that's when we were told by him and his mother that she was missing.
Now, did she have any other friends or friendships besides Nathan during that time?
Not as far as we knew. When we went through her social media, we found quite a few messages between her and people that we had never met or even heard of, that we aren't sure if they were just, casual hookups that she had, or, maybe some flings or whatever. The messages are pretty saucy in nature. But again, it wasn't people we had ever heard of, except for maybe one or two that we had met, when they were still friends. There was a young woman who reached out to our family and said that she had an ex-boyfriend who she believed was friends with Casey and Nathan. And she said that around the time of my mom's disappearance, he had asked if she would drive him to this party at this pastor's house. Again, her landlords and Nathan's parents are pastors, and that he was going to be hanging out with, two of his friends. They were going to party and stuff like that. And she had told him she didn't want to drive them. And she said that on July 6th, the day after my mom went missing, he showed up at her house really suddenly. She described him as being frantic and said that he needed to shower at her house and that he needed a change of clothes and that he needed to borrow her car. He needed to not drive his car anymore. She took that to the investigator and, she took one of his shirts and said, I'm worried that if you test this, you might find Casey's DNA. Something just sits in my spirit wrong with it. And the investigator then frisked her, searched her purse, and told her that he thought, maybe she was strung out on drugs and sent her away without testing anything. So,
Wow.
And didn't even take the shirt, sent the shirt back with her?
Right. This is the second investigator who took over the case. The first investigator had his own blunders. He had viewed the CCTV footage of my mom leaving the hospital and never downloaded it, so it was automatically deleted off the server after a week. So we don't have her last moments at all. That's been a question we've gotten quite a bit. People asking, can you post the video so we can see? Maybe we noticed something. Maybe we can tell you where she went. And just to formally get it out there, we would love to. I've never actually even seen the video. But funnily enough, Nathan had made a post on Facebook where he described what she was wearing. He's like, she leaves the hospital in just hospital socks. She's not wearing any shoes. And that was something that we only found out by watching the video. And the video was not public information at that point. We had not even seen the video at that point. I don't even know if the detective had seen the video at that point to confirm that. And when we asked, like, hey, maybe you should ask him about that because that's not something he would have ever known, we were kind of pushed aside and never followed up with that. So,
Wow.
I don't want to sound like I'm bashing the police department. There's one investigator, Detective Estes, who has been very friendly with us. He's been very kind and encouraging to Casey's mom. We have, I think, are a little biased because we just really want her home. So I try to be very mindful of that. Obviously they have other cases, but July 5th of this year will be 5 years of her being missing. And in the state of South Carolina, she will be declared legally dead. So we are kind of trying to muscle it up a little bit to say, we're getting to crunch time here. We'd like to really have some answers before that anniversary comes up. I try not to get too frustrated and be understanding, but it gets to a point where you're kind of like, come on, guys. So
Yeah, absolutely. When was the last time you spoke with a detective?
I have tried to reach out to the detectives several times. I've called, I've left messages, I've texted, I've emailed. I have never, ever been given a response. The last time I think any of us had contact with the detectives was, if I had to estimate, probably 6 months ago. and it was a phone call where my Aunt Katrina had, said, we got to sit down, we got to talk about these things. And in the recording of the phone call, Detective Evan Markey just keeps saying, I'll just have to get back to you on that. And he says it, I think, upwards of like 15 times and never really gives her an answer on anything. And after that, we have not heard anything from them, despite us reaching out to them.
And do you have a page set up for her?
Yes, it's called Casey Come Home on Facebook. And that's where we've kind of been funneling, like, posting her flyer, posting information, stuff as it comes in, taking in questions from people, letting people kind of air out how they're feeling and stuff like that. It's more of a support group than anything, because, she touched a lot of people, and a lot of people have things that they want to say to her and wish that they could say to her. So that's really what it's kind of become. But it is a good source of information about her case as well.
Perfect. And then as far as the community helping and supporting you, is there anything that you would like them to do?
I don't know that there's something they aren't already doing. They've been very supportive, very helpful. Whenever we go to these missing person support events and stuff like that, they always show up in numbers, and they're always willing to pass out flyers and stuff. We have people in other states that we haven't really had contact with in, a couple decades, that just remember my mom from school, or, they remember her from clubs that they were in and stuff like that, who, have her flyer taped up at their job or in the back of their car and stuff like that. They wear their Casey Come Home t-shirts. So, I mean, it's not for lack of community that she's still missing. Definitely not.
Fantastic. And thank you for not giving up, keeping her name out there, and spreading her story and spending your time with us to tell her story. We really appreciate your voice.
Well, thank you guys for asking about it. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. And if there's anything that you need, you just let us know.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I do have
Thank
one
you.
suggestion,
Oh,
real
go ahead.
quick. It's a
Yeah.
suggestion, so I just didn't want to hang up and not say. Is it possible that she could be in any type of homeless shelter?
We have reached out to a couple homeless shelters and homeless encampments that are in the area, like tent cities and stuff. We've sent people out there to kind of ask around. We still have not had any positive hits on that. We've let them know if there's like a Jane Doe who comes in, what she looks like. We've left our posters in the area and stuff like that. As far as we know, no.
I was just going to give a suggestion and get like a good area and then fax over flyers so that way they can see them.
That's a
So,
really good suggestion.
And do you have your
especially in areas that she lived or knows. Even if it's
right.
not South Carolina, it could be California, and somehow she managed it out there.
Right.
So,
And do you have your DNA submitted, or anybody in the family?
My grandmother's DNA was submitted.
okay.
Perfect. And from the police station, did it get uploaded to NamUs?
As far as we know, it was. I will double check on that just because I want to be diligent. But as far as I know, it was.
Awesome. Anything else, Tess? I didn't mean to talk over you. I
No,
apologize.
you're good. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
It's something people don't think about, so it's
Right,
definitely,
absolutely.
especially since she's lived everywhere. I would send it to areas where she lived because I mean it's not hard to hop on a bus and no one know who you are.
Right. And sometimes they can't tell you if they're there or not. So
Right.
it would be the voice of somebody who actually saw her there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean I think of Trevor Nichols. He went missing in Fort Drum, New York, and he was missing for 6 years. And just recently, he had an encounter with the police in San Diego, California, and he was living homeless.
Mm.
So
And actually had a police encounter.
they took his picture and everything, and it was him. So,
And yeah.
That's the hope we're holding on to, is that maybe she did grow a spine and is roughing it somewhere, then we just didn't know she was capable of doing that. So
Right.
we're definitely clinging to some hope here.
Right, because you never know.
Absolutely.
Right, right.
Well, thank you again so much for spending the time and telling her story with us. We greatly appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate you.
Thank you.